All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saoirse Hinksman, and we're going to be walking through performance pitfalls to avoid in 2019. So let me resume this. Sorry about that. All right, so as I mentioned before, my name is Saoirse Hinksman. I'm a digital content marketing manager here at SmartBear. I also work on the alert site team, so I'll be taking you through the monitoring aspect of today's webinar. And today I also have Keshav and Russell with me. If you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hey everybody, hope everyone can hear us loud and clear. I'm Keshav, I'm the product manager.
Hello, this is Russell, sales engineer over here at SmartBear.
All righty. So without further ado, just to give you guys a little bit of background on SmartBear, I know that most of you are probably familiar with SmartBear, but for those of you that aren't, we're a Boston-based company, and we create software tools that span across the entire software development lifecycle to help teams inject quality at every stage of the lifecycle. And so what that looks like from a product perspective is pretty in-depth. I won't go through all of these, but just to give you guys a little bit more insight as to sort of what the SmartBear toolset looks like and what we'll be talking about today. So like I had mentioned before, we have tools that span across the entire software development lifecycle on both the UI and the API layer. And so today we'll be talking more about the products toward the latter end of the SDLC, so Load Ninja, Load UI Pro, and Alert Site. Load Ninja is used to create web load tests, Load UI, load tests APIs, and then Alert Site monitors both the UI and the API layer, which we'll get into a little bit later. So today I'm going to go over really quickly like what digital performance is and why it's important, both from a team perspective and from an organizational perspective. And then we'll go over what are some of the pitfalls or mistakes, the common ones that we hear that people continue or teams continue to struggle with. And from there, we'll talk about what are some tips and tricks or ways that you can overcome any of these issues or mistakes that you run into. And then the bulk of our webinar will be talking about what are some of the ways that you can overcome those issues with the SmartBear tools that you have. And we'll do a live Q&A at the end, but just for the sake of time, I would request if you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot them into the Q&A functionality within Zoom. We can all see them, and if we have time as we're going along, I'll try and pick those up and answer them as we go. That way we don't miss any going forward. So let me just see. Oops. So who cares about digital performance, right? I like to kind of go over what digital performance means from our perspective. And so the way that I see it is really, it's a measurement of how well you can deliver the digital experience that you had either planned on or envisioned during your development process. And so in terms of KPIs or benchmarks, like really giving an understanding of where you're at, the three things that I like to keep in mind are uptime, speed, and functionality. And I know that those kind of become very arbitrary, especially when you're looking at sort of improving and optimizing. You sort of see it as just a number, right? But it does have real world impacts and particularly organizational impacts. And so some of the things I wanted to highlight were the real impacts of those measurements, right? So for a website that takes more than 3 seconds to load, 40% of people will abandon that site. That's a pretty hefty number when you think about it, especially considering 3 seconds really isn't that long. I think in our modern sort of opinion, it definitely takes a long time, but when you actually think about it, it's really not that bad, especially thinking about how your performance is currently or what your benchmarks look like. Just to continue on those, I'll show all of these at the same time. So as you can see, bouncing off of that, a 1 second delay can result in 7% reduction in conversions. So 7% is also a pretty hefty number, especially considering that 40% is just of your traffic. 7% is about the people that will convert on your site. So that's pretty crazy. And obviously, I think everybody can agree that any delay or downtime can really cost your company a lot of money. And so in this case, saying if an e-commerce site is making $100,000 per day, a 1 second delay could potentially cost them $2.5 million lost in sales every year. So I'll just let that sink in for a sec. And then the last one is really just that a 2-second delay during sales transaction results in abandonment rates of up to 87%. So these are pretty crazy. I know that we kind of get in our heads about the KPIs that we need to meet and sort of benchmarking ourselves and get into this sort of like team bubble, but really think about it from an organizational perspective as well. Like the work that we do does really matter. It really does impact a lot of different aspects of the business that sometimes become a little bit arbitrary. So digital performance definitely is important and something to keep in mind at all times. This is just, I'm just going to highlight this as well. I actually took these from Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So when you think about thinking about it with a bigger lens, right? Like sort of from an outside version in, the user experience really does matter. People get obviously upset. And then that can cycle into a bunch of negative things, right? Like one of the things that people take or weight highly is word of mouth or their friends' opinions or suggestions. That's something that really guides sort of the user journey and people's buyer's journey, especially. And so when you end up having situations like extended downtime, it just becomes crazy. And then you get tweets like this, which you obviously want to avoid. And so how did these companies end up getting there, right? I think it happens to everybody. You're not going to ever go into production with a stellar, completely functional record at all times. But what matters is your ability to predict those things and then to react to those issues. And so some of the common problems that we see or mistakes that we see teams make, I bucketed into these sort of 6 categories, right? One would be executing irrelevant tests. And what I mean by irrelevant isn't necessarily like that they're not important. It's just that they're executing tests that don't have realistic expectations or they don't mirror real life scenarios very well. And so I'll talk about that after, but the next one would be not load testing or APIs. So I think this is kind of an area that people are moving toward a little bit more now, but I think people are also seeing the importance of doing so because modern day applications, both web and mobile, rely heavily on APIs for their functionality. And so it's a key element to make sure that these are functioning properly, even under load. The next one would be really just embracing that testing bottleneck sort of stereotype, right? Like this comes down really to efficiency and effectiveness. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can overcome this in the next couple slides, but just keep that in mind. And the latter 3 are really focused more towards on the production side of things. So we have a lot of companies, especially customers, or not customers, but prospects who come to us and say like, you know, we need to implement a monitoring tool because we were really just waiting for people to tell us when something is wrong. And at that point, it's already too late. The next one would be only monitoring API availability. And what that means is that you're only hitting that endpoint to make sure that it comes back with a 200 OK. While that is awesome and great, it's still really important to make sure that APIs are fast and functioning as expected. And lastly, I like to call this monitoring with tunnel vision. So what that means is very similar to the executing irrelevant tests in that you're not running a monitor that reflects what a real user would do or the user journeys that would realistically happen that are important to the bottom line for your business. And so some of the ways that you can overcome these sort of top mistakes really is by doing I like to bucket it into 2 big high level things. So taking an end user perspective or keeping the end user in mind at all times. And then making sure that you're testing early and testing often. And so what that would mean from sort of a tactics perspective is to make sure that you're creating test scenarios that are realistic, right? If you have some production data to show what your key user journey are or what that path would look like, replicating those tests for further updates that you want to push into production would be super helpful. And also adding certain levels of randomness and variability. The next one I would like to highlight a little bit more just because we actually recently released a product that we'll go over today, Load Ninja, which allows you to load tests in real browsers. So this lets you get the most realistic scenario of what would happen to your web applications in production. And so that's something that's super important as you go through your testing cycles. And then in order to save time and become more efficient, really just being able to use a test recorder so that you can record and replay your scripts as opposed to spending tons of time trying to correlate them or script from scratch, build brand new tests. It just sometimes takes way too long, and it basically perpetuates that testing bottleneck like I had mentioned before. And additionally, if you have any SLAs that you can try and test and make sure that you're staying on par for, that would be awesome. Those are really helpful, especially when issues happen in production and you need to recreate them and fix them quickly. And lastly, I would say test early and test often. And so what that means is if you're able to, I know that I had mentioned earlier that testing and performance typically comes toward the end of the software development lifecycle. But if you can sort of shift that paradigm a little bit, and typically this is called like shifting left, like if you can begin to test earlier and increase the amount of feedback that you get earlier on, that will really benefit you down the line. And then from a monitoring perspective, I'd just like to highlight what I'm talking about mainly is focused towards synthetic. People tend to sleep on synthetic or sort of come to it as a last result, but really what it can act as is an early warning system. So you can go in and make sure that you're not waiting until the last minute when something's already broken and users are already telling you about it to go in and fix it. You can set up monitors to make sure that you are alerted to degradation over time or performance anomalies. If there's something that's only happening in one location, you'll be the first to know about that. And so the way to become better at monitoring and really understanding like what's going on with all of your applications in production is to follow these sort of things, right? These couple steps. So firstly, please record tests or reuse your test scripts if that's possible in the tool that you have. Having your ops team spend a lot of their time trying to recreate the wheel and re-script tests that your teams have already done in their test environments is going to take way too much time. It's just not going to be valuable. You're going to end up having monitors. That's kind of how you end up having monitors that don't necessarily reflect real world scenarios, only because it takes too long to try and do that. And at that point, you have huge gaps and blind spots in your production environments, and it's really not a good way to go. And like I had mentioned earlier, just think like an end user. Make sure that your monitors are reflecting realistic scenarios. And then the last three are sort of the most important ones that I want to highlight. One being monitor from multiple locations. I can't tell you how many people only run a monitor in one location. And even though maybe that location's important to you for a particular reason, that's fine. Definitely run it in that location, but make sure that you have other locations to benchmark it off of. Because if something goes down on another side of the world and you don't know about it and you think everything's coming up roses, it's going to be a big issue. Next, I would use synthetic and real data together. Oftentimes, people think you have to choose one or the other. In reality, combining both of these measurements or these reflection of your state in real life helps you get a better grasp on what's going on and really helps you narrow down the root cause of any issues that you may have. And lastly, I would start to monitor your SLAs as well, whether you're a vendor or you're someone that consumes. Maybe you have a deal with someone to consume their API, but it's not functioning as it should, or it's going slower than you had agreed to. That's something that you can do really easily and make sure that the impact on your application is limited. And ultimately, can you do this with the tools that you already have? Yes, you can. Obviously, we'll go through it today. As I had mentioned before, really what we'll be running through is how you can embrace all of these tips and avoid these mistakes with 3 of our performance tools. So that being Load Ninja, Load Ui, and finally Alert Site. And so I'll hand it over to Keshav after this. So I'm going to explain what we're going to run through. So essentially, we have created a pet store. So you can search for, pick out, and add any pet that you'd like to your cart. and we have both the UI and the API layer. So we'll be running load tests on the UI layer, then load test the API layer, and then we'll set up monitors for both the UI and the API layer to make sure that those things are functioning as you intended. So I'll hand it over to you, Keshav, if you want to get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarsha. Let me actually start sharing my screen real quick. So I hope everyone can see my screen well. So right now, I am actually in the Load Ninja platform. Before I, of course, start detailing what the platform is, I'd like to touch on the hypothetical scenario we're going to be testing, and we're going to be understanding our different products on. So essentially, think of us as we're having an e-commerce application that allows you to purchase pets online. And there's the UI layer, which you're seeing right now on the screen, and there's an API layer, which Russell will be load testing after this specific segment of the demo. Over here right now, you're seeing the UI layer of this, and this is a simple pet store application where I can search for, say, for example, I can search for a bulldog item. I can add this to my cart, and then, of course, I can check it out and purchase pets online. That's a simple e-commerce application. So this is the application we're going to be testing, and the specific transactions we're going to be testing today are the login functionality, it's going to be the search functionality, and potentially the homepage as well. So right now I'm back to my the Load Ninja platform. It's Load Ninja is a simple cloud-based platform that allows you to load tests on the fly. And every single test asset in Load Ninja is organized through the lenses of a project. So think of projects as folders where you can compartmentalize and segment your different test scripts and of course your test runs as well. I already have 2 existing test scripts already set up in my existing SmartBear project, and within Load Ninja you can set up an unlimited number of projects, so there's no limit to that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and start recording my first test script. And if you recall, research I mentioned, Load Ninja uses real browsers. Well, I'll show you the true advantage of Load Ninja, so apart from the real browser technology, is our ability to instantly record and play back test scripts without doing any sort of correlation or coding whatsoever. So with that said, let's actually go ahead and record our first test script. As soon as I click record, we're going to be seeing this prompt where we have to enter the URL of the web application we want to test. And if you notice, this is the URL over here. Of course, this is a public-facing application, and we wanted to keep this public so that the people on our demo can actually come in and try them anytime. If you are looking for internal applications, behind a firewall, which is predominantly what load testing will be about, you can do that as well with our proxy. So I'm just going to click copy over here. And you can also decide the form factor, the device resolution you want to be testing this on. And this is particularly important or useful when you have web applications that are responsive. Right, so you have so this way you can essentially record test scripts across multiple device sizes. That goes across the desktop and tablet and mobile. I'm going to be choosing the most common desktop resolution. I'm going to click start recording. As soon as we click start recording, we are actually taken to the Instaplay recorder. In the Instaplay recorder, let me actually explain what you're seeing on the screen. On the right is essentially your web application being rendered, in what you're seeing through a real browser. On the left is essentially the controls for your recording. And here are all the steps that we'll be essentially capturing based on the transactions we want to capture on this test script. Notice that we did not have to go through any sort of plugin downloads. I didn't have to talk to anyone to get a Chrome extension. This is, again, all on the fly. You can just enter URL and get into the recorder. So let's go ahead and record a few transactions. Let's assume that in this case, I expect my users to be logging in. Right, so I'm putting in some credentials. I'm going to be searching for a pet item. In this case, let me search for the poodle item. I'm going to be adding this to the cart. And then once I'm satisfied, let me just log out, and then I'm stopping. Simple set of user transactions over here. Simple set of user transactions. Notice that every single page load that we had performed on this web application has been captured as a separate step. And each step's title is the title of the page itself, right? And all the different actions I have performed on that specific page are also captured under that specific step. So notice that there's the mouse moves, there's click events, and of course there's keyboard inputs as well. So let's actually go ahead and make this test script more user-friendly or consumable by changing the name of the script steps. In this case, for example, I'm going to call this the home page, right? So that way, at least when I share it with different stakeholders, they easily understand what the name of what that specific step is supposed to represent. I can call this the last one as well, home page. But then this is signed out. So, so it's the signed out page. So let me just correct the spelling real quick. Right, so again, we're just making this more user-friendly. Now, traditionally, when you look at the load testing ecosystem in general, when we're talking about recording test scripts, most tools, I would even venture to say almost every single tool that exists in the market right now records test scripts through the protocol layer, right? Essentially, where you are essentially capturing all the traffic between the server and the client. There's of course benefits to that, but the biggest challenge with doing this is essentially the step that follows this, which is essentially you have to, in order to get this test script to play back once you've recorded the transactions through the protocol level, you have to do something called dynamic correlation, where you have to look at all of those requests and responses, capture all of the different dynamic components of these requests and responses. This could include, for example, the most common one is the cookie. And then you have to translate that across all of these subsequent requests and responses in order to get this to be in order to play this back for one virtual user. And then again, you have to translate that across tens of thousands of views, depending, of course, on your requirements for your load test. Load Ninja essentially allows you to abstract all of that. So with Load Ninja's Instaplay recorder, you don't have to do any sort of dynamic correlation or coding whatsoever. So the next immediate step, which is to get this script to play back, you can do that without doing the coding. So I'll show you that in just a second. Before I do the playback, of course, I do want to change the think time. The think time is essentially the time between different steps that we've recorded. It's set default to recorded, which is the time you actually have recorded during we've captured during the recording itself. But I'm going to change this to minimum, which is the fastest way possible to go from step 1 to step 2, only because I was talking a lot during the demo and I don't want to use the same times that we use for recording during the playback. So with that said, let's actually go ahead and click playback. So notice now that during the playback, we're actually clicking login, we're putting in our credentials. We're searching for the pet item. We're adding this to the cart. And then we're checking out. So we just went from the first step to the final step doing the playback without, again, touching any of those requests and responses, doing any sort of coding or scripting whatsoever. The other cool thing about this is usually when you have any sort of client-side Ajax or JavaScript calls that take place, if you use a protocol recorder, like best example is JMeter, you will essentially have to do some level of scripting in order to capture those client-side changes, because there's no interaction between the server and the client in those cases. With Load Ninja, because of our technology, which is driving the client side itself, you don't have to do any of those scripting whatsoever to capture client-side JavaScript. Now, of course, like as Sarsha mentioned, one of the most important things you need to do in your performance testing is to create a real-world scenario. So in this case, I need to essentially make sure that my load test scripts as well follow some real-world scenarios. And in this case, this is an e-commerce application, and I don't anticipate multiple users coming in and searching for the same pet item, which is poodle. So we can essentially connect this specific test script to an external CSV file, which contains external data, and iterate through different search items that we have already set up in the specific CSV. So in this case, if you notice, I have already set up a CSV file which has 2 different columns. The first column actually is the one which I'm interested in, which has a list of all the different pet items I anticipate my end consumers to be searching for. And this I potentially have gotten from the marketing team based on the analytics that they have captured on the website. So let's actually go ahead and connect this specific test script to that CSV file. So I'm clicking Browse. It's going to ask me to pick the specific file from my local machine. I'm going to click Demo Databank CSV. Once I'm satisfied with the file, I can see a quick preview of the file. And this is just showing all the items that we have in that CSV file. And once I'm fairly sure that this is the right CSV file, I'm going to map the specific recorded input that we have captured with the data from the external CSV file. So this is the recorded input, which was poodle. I'm going to map this to the search animals column, and we're getting a quick preview of that file, of that item in the file as well. So once I'm satisfied with this, let's click Save. Before I play this back, I want to show you one more thing, which is our ability to add validations. Now, load testing is primarily about understanding the degradation of a web application and seeing at which point your web application will fail, and potentially making sure a web application won't fail in the right anticipated traffic. So in those cases, you want to make sure your server is returning the right information to your clients, irrespective of the load your servers are encountering. So you can essentially check that different pages different pages are actually returning the right information through validations. So there's two types of validations that you can add. You can add a simple validation, which is through a text form, where we essentially search for different strings on different pages of your recorded test script. You can also add complex validations through JavaScript. Like, for example, in this e-commerce application example, you can ensure that the final sum of prices of all the pet items that you've added to your cart is actually accurate and is true and is representative of all the sum of the individual items. Right? So you can add those complex validations to JavaScript as well. In this case, I'm going to add simple text validations. So first validation I'm going to add is a validation which I know will pass. It's essentially, I'm going to call this the pass validation. And I'm going to check on the last page if the page contains the word dogs. Let's add a validation which I know will fail now. Let's call this the fail validation. I'm going to check if this page contains the word puppy. So let's add both these validations. Now, just quick, I've recorded my test script. I've added two validations, and I've now connected my test script to external data. So let's actually go ahead and play this back now.
And as we're playing this back, I'm just going to launch a poll real quick. Feel free to answer them. We're just trying to figure out who's on the call and what you guys would like to learn about, what you guys are up to, and what we can talk about that will better help you guys achieve your performance goals. There's only 3 questions, so don't worry. In this one, at least, I have 2 more, but that's just 4 questions.
So we just played this test script back, and if you've noticed, instead of searching for the word poodle during playback, we had searched for the word Manx in the search bar over here. And also, that's again because of the fact that we're connected to an external data set. And also, finally, in the playback results, we get one failing step, which was essentially searching for the word puppy, and the word puppy doesn't exist on that page, and that's the reason why we're getting that the validation that it's failing. So once I'm satisfied with my recorded test script, I can just go ahead and save the script. So let's actually call this basic search. I'm just giving a simple name. I'm putting this under my project, the SmartBear project, and then I'm going to save this. So once I've actually saved this test script over here, you'll find this back in your projects, and you'll see that there's 3 different recorded scripts. The home page and the login I've already created in the past. So now let's go ahead and create an actual scenario. Think of scenarios as essentially configurations for your load test itself. Right? So I'm going to give this a simple name. And in this case, I'm going to, in the scenarios where I can add the number of virtual users, so in this case, let's say 15 virtual users, I can add the test scripts that I want in the specific test. I've added all 3 test scripts that I have. I can distribute the load across these different scripts. So in this case, I'm going to say I want 60% of the load to go into my basic search test script, which we just recorded, and the homepage and login functionality, I'm just going to have 20% of the 15 virtual users get to that. I can set how long I want the test to run for. So in this case, I'm going to just set this to 5 minutes. I can, of course, add ramp up times and delay between iterations and so on. But that I'm going to leave that to what is the default value. And finally, we can also specify how we want to handle errors. Remember that validation we added, which was supposed to fail. So essentially, we can cap anytime there's a validation that fails or any sort of other error, Load Ninja will automatically capture those errors and allow you to hold the connection with that browser live. Because we're using real browsers at scale for load tests, you can connect to that browser, interact with the browser through a JavaScript terminal, and start debugging in real time. So we can set how long we want the debugging to happen in the Load Ninja scenario console. Once I'm satisfied with this, I can just click Save and Run. And this is where Load Ninja will start configuring, will start spinning up servers and allocating different virtual users based on your test scenario, right? And this is where I want to emphasize that every single virtual user that we configure, be it 15 virtual users or 15,000 virtual users, all of them correspond to a real browser, right? So each virtual user is actually interacting with your web application based on your script through a real browser. And so this is the most accurate representation of load on your web application at scale across the market. And you can be rest assured that one, this is realistic load on your web application. So this means that the data you get back will be very, very accurate and very, very reliable. And of course, once you're satisfied, once you once you have the data as well, this data can be used to give directly to your developers without any sort of translation, because it's the same data they use on a regular day-to-day basis to debug applications and build web applications, because it's from the browser's DOM.
So, Keshav, we just got a question, and they want to know how you decide to distribute your load to different scripts.
If you should think of scripts as usually, let me answer that in two ways. Usually what we see right now is people usually just record one script or one or two scripts at the most and just distribute that 50-50. The way I think of it is like your script should essentially capture a unit of actions, a set of actions that you think your web application will be encountering. And multiple scripts should be in the scenario which are all part of the same overarching transaction. So, you could have one script which is just the login, for example, and then you could have another script which is just the checkout process. And this way you can understand, okay, so this scenario is looking through the login and then the checkout process, and then like allowing you to allocate the load efficiently across them. And again, this should be based on your analytics team telling you what the real world scenarios which you anticipate, and also potentially some judgment on your end as well. And of course, each case is unique and different. So we can definitely talk about this offline as well. Right now we're seeing the charts populate in real time. So this is all of our different response times. This is the navigation timings. Navigation timings is something pretty cool, because this is the timings we're getting straight from the browser. So things like DOM load time and DNS time or redirect time, these types of timings you won't get back from a traditional protocol recorder. Because of the fact that we're using real browsers, you can actually get that information as well.
And if you have, just to compare, if you have a monitoring tool that you're using currently and you want to figure out what your baseline is and what you should be testing off of, or what you should expect, those metrics are the same. So you'd be able to create a sort of a unified view of what your performance is in your test environments, what you're testing for, and compare that to what the reality is in production as well, which is pretty cool.
Yep. What you're seeing right now is the live video up, where essentially we're going to show you in real time live 4 virtual users that are interacting with your web application based on the transactions you record in your script. And this gives you one surety that the test is actually running and those transactions are actually being done correctly. And 2, anytime you find some sort of performance issue, you can immediately capture that through a video itself, and like you'll know how to recreate those performance issues now that there's a video. Remember, we had added those failure validations and defined how we want to handle those errors through the debugger. This is the live view of the debugger. So these are all the various performance issues that have been captured by Load Ninja. And essentially, anytime there's the issue, we hold the connection to the browser live. You're seeing right now, I'm actually connected in real time to that specific browser in question, right? I can now interact with that specific browser through a JavaScript terminal, right? And start debugging the specific browser, debugging this issue through the browser in real time, right? So if there's critical performance issues and you want to just roll up your sleeves and get into the code, you can do that as well using Load Ninja. And of course, we give you the regular statistics as well across the performance test using the regular statistics table. So with that said, I'm going to hand this off to Russell over here. Just to quickly summarize, we've just recorded a simple test script on Load Ninja for a web application, played it back without doing any sort of coding or correlation, and then simulated a real world scenario and performed a load test, again, through real browsers, giving you very, very accurate information on the performance of your web application.
Hey, Keshav, someone wants to know if you can simulate IP spoofing.
Not right now, but it's definitely in our roadmap.
Alrighty.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Keshav. My name's Russell Viola. Thanks everyone for coming. It's a great look at Load Ninja and how we can start to load test our applications and our APIs on the client side. Another piece of this load testing puzzle comes from when we're we need information from the API layer as well as our front-end client side load testing. So that's when we kind of look to Ready API platform and the types of functional testing we get from SOAP UI. And through that, we actually hop into Load UI. So I kind of want to start where our workflow would begin, which would be with the SOAP UI functional test. So we're looking at our pet store. We've created a comprehensive workflow with some validations here that's actually simulating some real world API interaction with our pet store API. And I'm data driving it. I have some complex logic going on. I have a few scripts going. And what we can do with Load UI is actually take all the features from this functional test and all our validations and start to apply concurrency to this. So we can test our API on the API layer at scale now and start to look for bottlenecks in performance. And not only on the API layer, but our servers and databases as well. And we're going to look at some granular, detailed metrics that we get back from that and look at some solutions we have for distributing that load to get exactly the level of concurrency we need to push our application to the limits. So I'm creating a load test directly here in SOAP UI, and it's actually going to bring me directly into our Load UI interface. And you can see my functional test has been brought in full form, exactly as it was as a part of the scenario in Load UI. Now, scenario would essentially act as a thread here. So I can kind of custom tailor the types of load that we're going to bring in to Load UI, whether that be multiple scenarios. I can string together my functional tests within one scenario. And I'll actually be able to mix and match these using a scheduler to really home in on exactly the type of load I want to introduce to my application, my API, so we can get the right data back for what we need Load UI for at this moment. So there's multiple ways that we can actually custom tailor this load, right? I'm actually going to keep it down to one scenario just so that we're looking at kind of one object here. And we'll kind of take a closer look at what goes into organizing this scenario and the types of things we can do with it and how we look at this data. So in my menu here, I have the option of, you know, all the popular load types, most industry standards like ramp up and sequences. We even have the option to custom build load scenario if we need something very specific for our testing purposes here. I like to kind of show ramp up. It's usually a good way to get to a high peak of virtual users, which is essentially our concurrent threads here in Load UI. And we'll do this for about 15 seconds, let's say. What we also do here in our scenario options is set assertions in Load UI. And what these are a little bit different than the types of assertions we would make in SOAP UI, which would be more on an individual thread level. For functionality, in Load UI, we're testing scalability. So when we make assertions on these scenarios, we're essentially setting benchmarks for the expected behavior of our API under load. So I would set a constraint for something like time taken for my API calls, say between 0 and 100 seconds or milliseconds, right? And then I would set tolerance because maybe I expect 1 or 2 failures. Maybe 3 is too many in the span of 15 seconds. And that's the behavior I'm expecting at that point of load. So this test will be triggered as a failure now if I don't meet those expectations, and I'll know to start looking here. As I make changes to my API, maybe I'm refactoring the test suite, maybe we've made some changes to our database structure or our server structure. We'll come and look at these benchmarks to make sure that we're still meeting our targets as far as handling load goes. So let's run the test here, and we'll start to see what kind of metrics we get back here on the load screen. And we can see these kind of happening in real time here as the load test launches. But where we really get some valuable information is not only just watching this live, but hopping over to our statistics page. And this is where we're actually going to be able to drill down to really specific and granular information as it pertains to our load testing use cases. So this is kind of a generic form of our load test here. Looks like we had a short load test actually, but it's important just to see what exactly we can drill into when we're looking at statistics groups. So we'll see if we can get some more data back here in real time. And it looks like we got a little bit more. A couple failures, something interesting going on. So let's look at this, a new statistics group, and say none of this information is actually pertinent to us at all for this use case, or perhaps we're looking for a certain bottleneck. I'm actually going to be able to dig in and drill down at a very granular level here. Say I'm only interested in this particular API request and some time taken, and I'm looking for correlations in our load scenario here. I'm going to be able to drill down to that specifically and now export this data or generate reports, whether that be data export in XML or CSV format, or particular statistics, or a PDF format for maybe teammates who aren't using the tool, or just folks who need this graphical representation and some extra data. So we can print out our statistics groups individually or in a greater report, which will overview the load test in general. Another thing that we want to look at when we're load testing and performance testing on this API layer is the hardware and the other systems that our API relies on, because we might see some bottlenecks in our API and not really have an explanation as to why. And it's important that we get all the information on all the pillars that the API relies on to perform. That would come in the form of servers and SQL databases and things like that, which we can actually directly connect to here from Load Ui. So I've connected to my Windows machine, and we'll be able to actually get the same level of detailed metrics back on our server performance as well. So now when we're starting to look at bottlenecks, we can look for correlations between our API, our server layer, and our databases, and see kind of exactly what's getting stressed under these load tests, right? So I can actually go into my statistics group now, and I have another section of server monitors, and I can hop right into my available kilobytes per se on my server and see how that correlates with my time taken in this statistics group. And of course, I'll be able to compare these to older runs. If I need to look at some correlations, say we've done a refactor and we want to see if we fixed some issues, we're going to be able to put these runs side by side and really look to see how our performance is being affected. So I also want to mention our distribution process here in Load Ui Pro. So essentially, what a pitfall that we often come across when we're doing performance testing in a program like Load Ui or JMeter or some other desktop-based performance testing is that we are pretty much limited to the capacity and the power of one machine to generate this concurrency and generate this load, and perhaps that's not always going to be enough to actually push our APIs and our servers to the limits. So what we can do within Load Ui Pro is utilize a tool called the Load Agent, which is a free software downloadable from the website. You can use as many of these as we need to. And essentially, we have two options when we're starting to connect to these agents. We can run off of a local agent that I have installed here. We can connect via IPs and ports, or we also have the option to connect via Amazon EC2. So if we have an Amazon EC2 instance, we can actually put in those credentials to Load UI. Load UI is going to communicate with that instance, create an agent image, and we'll actually be able to choose from a number of global regions offered by SmartBear to start testing in different locations. Maybe we need to check out load across the world as opposed to always checking from one centralized location. We're going to be able to do that using EC2 instances. And rather than run scenarios on one computer now, I'll be able to actually disperse these scenarios across, determining, how much load is in each scenario, how much load can each machine handle. Do I want to disperse this so that everyone can continue working? We don't have to even notice this, right? And I'll be able to do that now and run scenarios on agents and get the same data back as if we were running off one machine by using this distribution model. So that's kind of how we get those levels of concurrency that we need to really start to, see when the wheels are shaking and starting to fall apart here. And that's the most important part of load testing. So it's important that we utilize these agents when we're looking at high concurrent numbers.
So I'm going to pause you real quick because we got a question. So someone wants to know if they can have the performance collection data from a specific server and then and the top processes that are affecting the performance.
Hold on. Can I hear that again?
Yeah, you can. It's on the thing too if we want to type the answer later. But it's basically just figuring out whether we can get the performance data from a specific server and then which ones are the top sort of processes that are slowing that down or impacting performance in general.
That's a good question. So we're going to be able to look at any number of statistics on our server. If you're wondering whether or not Load UI is going to notify you which ones in particular are failing or struggling, I think that would be a spot where we would start to maybe look at assertions. So we would trigger test failures and that sort of thing.
Awesome.
That would go along with the benchmarks that we're trying to set here. So I want to mention, talk a little bit here about applying this Load UI Pro workflow to a CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment workflow, which is increasingly becoming more and more of people's everyday lives, since it's incredibly efficient, and it's really the direction that a lot of developers are going because of its efficiency. And Load UI is not behind in that aspect. We're able to integrate with these CI/CD tools agnostically, actually. So the way that we can plug these load tests in to whichever tool we're using, be that Jenkins, Bamboo, Azure Cloud, VSTS, we can use what's called the Load UI test runner. And essentially, this is a batch or a shell script that's going to live next to your installation of Ready API and Load UI Pro on whichever server or machine that you'll be running the load tests from. And what we can do here is use this wizard to select things like different environments, if we have these set up, what kinds of reports we want to generate, things like specific statistics groups and where we want to export those, and if we have any custom or global properties. And all these selections that we make in the wizard actually come in as arguments when we generate our command line here. And this is going to be able to be plugged into any CI/CD tool that takes command line arguments. And now we can put these in our builds and start having these kick off automatically wherever we have this installation of Load UI and start getting those reports back up through our automation. So that really brings us from starting a functional test to bringing it in more higher concurrency while we customize the types of load we get in and really sort through the data in a granular way and see the things that are only important to us. And then we talk about distributing, perhaps getting those higher levels of concurrency that we might not otherwise be able to. And automating that stuff, getting it in your pipeline. That's it.
Alrighty. So real quick, I know we have 10 minutes left, so I just wanted to pause for a second. I just sent out a poll, and I'm going to send out one more. It only has 2 questions, but I wanted to quickly give you guys some insight into what our monitoring platform looks like and what you can do with that. So one of the things I had mentioned before is that people really have a hard time, especially when their teams, their ops teams specifically, don't have tools that empower them to create monitors without having to basically recreate the wheel and spend a bunch of time scripting complex scenarios or user journeys that map out accurately to a real world scenario. And so one of the really, really awesome things about AlertSite that makes it super easy is really just being able to get started easily. So for both, as I mentioned before, like we have eyes on API and web. So both of those layers are covered from a monitoring perspective. And some of the really important things that I want to highlight is you don't have to have developers use this tool. So if your ops team is trying to keep up with an agile process, or maybe you guys are implementing more of a DevOps sort of culture, this is something that is really, really simple to create complex monitors quickly. So you'll be able to keep up with the pace of your releases as opposed to trying to just push new code into production and then having your monitors break because something had changed and your ops team wasn't aware of it, and now you have no visibility really or eyes on what's happening in production from a monitoring perspective. So I'll start real quickly with the web monitor. I'm just going to show you what it looks like. I won't run through the entire thing in terms of setup, but I'll just give you guys a preview as to what that would look like. Let me change this share real quick. So we have a web recorder called DejaClick. It's super easy. It's as a Chrome extension, so I just pop that open real quick. So literally all you have to do to create a new web monitor, and this is a transaction monitor, so you can go through and act how a user would. Let's go back to the pet store. This is the same one that Keshav was using earlier for Load Ninja. Is really just making sure that you get a good understanding. Whoops. I went to the wrong URL. Sorry, guys. I'm going to start that over because I don't want it to go back to there. But essentially, all you have to do is click this, don't save, and start recording. So let's say we land on this page URL, trying to look at fish. I love angelfish. Let's just say that. Let's find that and a large one, right? And then I'll stop the recording there because I already know the price. I don't need to go any further. Let's just say $10 for an angelfish is way too much for me, and I'm over it now. So then you just go in, replay all the actions, runs through super fast, don't have any errors, woohoo. So I'm gonna add that then to my AlertSite account. And literally, let's just call this fish. And then it'll open up a window, oops, where I can actually just change the settings for the monitor within my account. So you'll go in super easy. I literally didn't have to open up a line of code, and all of those transactions, those clicks, those events, you can add keyword assertions as well if you'd like. Those will be recorded here. And you can go through and add, if there are certain advanced things that you want to add, like a certificate. If you want to edit the script on your own, you can do that. You can also change the location. So like I had mentioned before, one of the major things that people continue to do is monitor from a single location, which really doesn't benefit you as much as your monitor could. And it's really as simple as selecting one of these. And you'll notice there are a bunch of endpoint locations here. What that means is that we also have the ability to monitor from within your network. So if you have, for example, a private facing API, I know a lot of companies do these days, that's not something that you won't be able to have eyes on. We absolutely do that. And you actually don't have to punch a hole in your firewall to be able to run these monitors, which is also a super, super helpful thing for a lot of companies, especially if you're in sort of regulated industries or somewhere where it's just very complicated to get approval for that. So you can get up and running super easily. And then the next thing that I just wanted to show you was how to create a multi-step API monitor. And so what that means is I had alluded before to the fact that people only really monitor API availability. And that kind of limits them in their ability to see like what is going on from a speed perspective, but also from a functionality perspective. Like if you wanted to verify that you were getting a specific, I don't know, like keyword in the payload that comes back, you're able to do that within here super quickly. So let's just say I want to get a pet by ID. I'll just make the ID 1, validate that, and you'll get some information back here. So you can add in a JSON assertion if you like. You can add a variable, and a variable basically means if you're going to string together a bunch of different steps, so let's say I wanted to add another step and put in another request, that would then verify that in the next payload that comes back, that variable is still present. So let's say you had like a user ID or something that you wanted to verify comes back in the next set of payloads. You can do that as well. Super, super easily. And then from there, what you would do is very, very similar to the next set of steps that we had taken before. So you'd select a location. You can narrow down your alerts. So one of the things that we're able to do really, really well is validate alerts so that you don't end up getting berated by alerts that aren't necessarily important. So like if you have a little blip, if you we actually automatically retry a location and make sure that that is actually the case, that something is malfunctioning and it's not just a weird little blip that happened that no one really needs to be aware of. You can also route based on step level or error code so that no one, your whole team isn't getting blasted. You can narrow it down and make sure that the right people know about it at the right time. And something I just want to point out real quick is we don't have any SLA monitors in this account, but you're able to monitor your SLAs as well and report on those as well as alert on them. So let's say that you have an SLA that you have to be available 99.9% of the time. If you ever dip below that threshold, or if you're starting to degrade and it's becoming in sort of a worry, you can set those up as well so that you can go in and fix it before something terrible happens. And another thing that I just want to point out real quick that's super easy is the platforms that we were looking at before. So Ready API, which has our SOAP UI, our API functional testing, and our Load UI testing tool. You can actually take the Load UI test cases from within that platform and send them to your alert site account and run the monitor so that you can see, let's see if I have any in here. Yep, so this one is actually a SOAP UI monitor. So basically we just take that test script, send it here, and then you'll go through the same process. You can pick locations, figure out where you want to monitor from, set the alerts, and then you can set that up easy peasy, literally a couple steps. So it doesn't have to be this hugely laborious situation. So I'll leave this open just for a couple minutes. I wanted to make sure that we answer everybody's questions. I know we kind of threw a lot at you. And hopefully that was really helpful. I know there's a lot of sort of details that we like to get into and make sure that people know about. So if there's any questions, if you guys are looking to try and improve your performance process, whether it's with load testing or with monitoring, we're definitely open to that. Or if you think of questions at any point later, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll change the screen really quickly so that you guys can see my email. So let's do this. This is just a wrap up. I can also send out the slides as well if you guys are interested in that. But in the meantime, if you guys don't have any additional questions, let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. If you have any, please let me know or feel free to reach out to the email listed here. I'm more than happy to dive into any specific use cases. I know any of us would love to go through. If you guys would like to see a personalized or like more basically tailored demo, or if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will end this and let you guys go. Thank you guys so much for joining. I know we kind of rushed through, so thanks for sticking with us. And as I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to us. Other than that, have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.